Welcome, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Dr. Fernando Rojuela, and on behalf of the Colloquium Committee, which includes Dr. Barbara Hillers, Amanda Luke, and Ben Bridges, we all want to thank you for spending your afternoon with us this Thursday afternoon, and our guests, Dr. Krystal Smalls and Dr. Maria Hamilton Abegunde. So while many of us are not physically on the Bloomington campus, my Colloquium Committee partners and I still wish to acknowledge and honor the Miawaki, the Nelape, the Bodwe Wadmaki, and the Sowanwa, whose ancestral homelands and resources Indiana University is built. So I thank you for taking this time to listen to me, get us phased into our conversations with Dr. Smalls and Dr. Abegunde.
Well, thanks, Fernando. I really want to express appreciation to the department's Colloquium Committee. We have this nice collaboration going on with DERT and our Colloquium Committee. We had the Julianne Graper talk earlier this semester as part of a colloquium series, and here we are again. So thanks, Fernando, Barbara, Amanda. Am I missing somebody?
Ben.
And Ben. Thanks to the committee. We really appreciate, and we're honored actually to be part of this awesome series. Let me briefly introduce DERT, and that will lead me into introducing Doug Peach. Well, I don't want to go into the mythos of DERT to an extraordinary degree, but I will say that the Diverse Environmentalisms Research Team, known affectionately as DERT, has its origins in a conversation among folklorists and ethnomusicologists here in our department. So that's a nice thing about it. Out of that conversation, eventually we organized a symposium in March of 2017 on performing diverse environmentalisms, which brought together scholars from all around the country, several universities. Also, we had colleagues from Indiana University participate. And it was really a very inspiring and in some ways provocative gathering of scholars and activists. And we had a very good conversation. Out of that conversation, we have created a book. The book is now in press at University of Illinois Press, scheduled to be released in September of 2021. That is September of this year. The book is called Performing Environmentalisms. And yeah, we're pretty excited about that, as you can imagine. We have other things going on. We have a forum coming up at the American Folklore Society. And I should mention that we have another event scheduled for later this month. So we're thinking of it as not only is it Earth Day month, but it's DERT month. And so on Friday, April 23, we will have a DERT student symposium. Very excited about that. We have 4 students who will, from our program here, from our department, who will be giving papers. And the topic is environmental justice and expressive culture. So yeah, everybody come back. This is going to be a really interesting event. Well, let me express a warm welcome to everybody, especially to Professor Smalls. It's so good of you to join us. It's a year after we anticipated, but something about a virus got in the way. I'm really glad that we could make this happen. And welcome to all of you for being here. And Dr. Abegunde, thank you for participating with us as well. My pleasant now is to introduce really the catalyst, let's say the connecting piece here to make this event happen. And that is our friend, Doug Peach. So I can tell you this, Douglas D. Peach, is a PhD candidate in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology with a minor in African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University. His research focuses on issues of cultural sustainability, memory, performance, and religion among Gullah Geechee people, primarily in coastal South Carolina as well as the transnational circulation of Gullah Geechee heritage in Sierra Leone. He works as the folk life specialist at Sandy Spring Museum, where he runs the folklore program for Montgomery County, Maryland, and is the former South Carolina Folklife and Traditional Arts Program Director at McKissick Museum and the South Carolina Arts Section. I must say that Doug has also been a loyal contributor to DERT activities. He's been involved with us for a few years now, and as you can see, because he has brought this help to make this event happen, he is still an active contributor to what DERT is up to. So, Doug, thank you very much. I think it's time for me to hand the microphone, as it were, the metaphorical microphone, over to you.
John, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and as you promised, the riffed upon introduction. Thank you for that. That was quite in style. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I am confident this is going to be an edifying presentation and an enriching discussion for everyone who's here. On behalf of DERT, I want to give thanks to the sponsors for this afternoon's presentation. Our appreciation goes to the Neil Marshall Black Culture Center, Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, Department of Anthropology, Department of Linguistics, and the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology, all at Indiana University. Thank you for your support of this presentation. We really couldn't have done it without you. Final thanks to John, to you for helping us reach our final fundraising goal, and then as well to Angus Burke and Michelle Melhouse for their work in making this event a reality. I have John mentioned pleasure. I have the pleasure as well of introducing our speaker, Dr. Krystal Smalls, as well as our discussant, Dr. Maria Hamilton Abegunde. Dr. Krystal Smalls is an assistant professor of anthropology and linguistics at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research primarily focuses on the semiotics of race in young people's lives, or how people make meaning about and through race. She conducts ethnographic research in different geographic and conceptual locations of the Black diaspora, mostly in digital and urban spaces, to study the intersection of racial slavery, settler colonialism, and patriarchy as they play out in young people's lives. In doing so, she bears witness to and learns from the ways young people succumb to, reproduce, resist, refuse, and transform these structures through different kinds of meaning making. She's conducted this work with communities in Monrovia, Liberia, as well as Philadelphia here in the United States. A second and newer research focus is with her home community of Gullah Geechee, Insular and Coastal South Carolina. Dr. Smalls earned her PhD in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania in 2015. Dr. Maria E. Hamilton Abegunde is a memory keeper, poet, ancestral priest in the Yoruba or Risha tradition, healer, and doula. Her most recent works address racial violence, genocide, sexual violence, and healing in the United States, Brazil, Juba, South Sudan. And these works can be found in North Meridian Review, the Massachusetts Review, Tupelo Quarterly, Fire, and Keeper of My Mother's Dreams. Dr. Abegunde is a Kave Kanam, Sakatar, Ragdale, and NEH Fellow. She's the founding director of the Graduate Mentoring Center and a faculty member in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University. She also grew up on the island of Grenada and spent 2 months retracing Middle Passage routes by sailing. Water is the spirit, and that is capital S, that shapes her life and fills her soul. So without further ado, passing the mic here, let me pass the mic to you, Dr. Smalls.
Thank you so much for that very generous welcome. And yeah, thank you, Doug in particular, for putting in a lot of work to make this happen, and to everyone who contributed to organizing this. So I greet you all from the stolen lands of the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, the Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwegi, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw. And I just hope everyone's healthy and hopeful in these times. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share space with you, even digital, and to share this particular work. It means a lot to me. It's scary in different ways and complicated for me to share, but I'm excited to do so. And I'm really looking forward to Dr. Abegunde's response and to the conversation that follows. All right, so this is really, it's really a reflection that's emerging out of almost 5-year meditation on the significance of water in my life. And because my life extends beyond this body and its lifespan, the reflection is taking me to distant yet also very intimate places and spaces. And the meditation really started because I moved to the Midwest in 2015, and it was the first time I'd been this far from the ocean, and I could feel it. I could feel it in my body, the distance, and kind of feel out of place. What's one of the beautiful things that's come of it, that I've been forging a new relationship with freshwater, and a lot of that has actually been aided by a dear friend who's Chickasaw, and her ancestors were forcibly displaced, removed from their central southeastern lands and waters, and relocated to the Midwest in 1837. So she and I will talk a lot about just home, what home is, homelands, and eventually started talking about home waters. We talk about sovereignty and belonging and beginnings, and the ways they connect to water. And so this freshwater relationship has also been kindled by revisiting and kind of deepening my relationship with Oshun, who is a Yoruba Orisha of the rivers. And so even as I'm nurturing this new old relationship with Sweetwater, I'm also immersing myself even more deeply into this connection, this relationship with saltwater. So throughout my childhood, these are the home waters. So throughout my childhood, I always knew we were away from home. My parents and extended family, they always refer to Beaufort as home. That's the image on the on the left there with it's a homestead, my grandmother's homestead. And so I had a very clear sense at a young age that we were living in a kind of voluntary exile. My father joined the military at 22, and with his young wife and baby in tow, my sister Davina, they left the Low Country to start a life that would literally take them all over the world. But the first stop would be North Carolina, just up the road, but they say for them it felt as far foreign as Germany, which is where they would go next and where I would be added to the mix. And so I came to understand and to really see how my parents carried home with them, and the ways they made it, they recreated it in every location that we lived. The most palpable way or prevalent way, I guess, is in their words. They made home in how they spoke, mixing in a good deal of Gullah language, but also they made home in the food they prepared, and in the ways they worshiped, and just the ways they painted the world for my sister and me. And I recall in relation to food here, so I have so many pictures, that whenever we had easy access to fresh seafood, like when we lived in Panama or when we were in Virginia, it was somehow made us closer to home, mostly because we could prepare foods properly, right? We had good sweet shrimp for our shrimp and okra, and fresh crab and whatnot for crab and grits. But these were, just some of the very kind of daily infused ways that my parents brought Gullah along with us throughout our childhood. So examining my own relationship with water, it means considering their relationship, my parents' relationship and my parents' relationships, and the communities that nurture them. all of their relationships with water. So in many ways, this is a reflection. This reflection is very much personal, spiritual work, maybe more so than scholarly, but I hope that it offers something by way of better understanding the significance of salt water in the lives of Gullah folk, those who stayed close to it and those who've wandered afar, like my parents, even though that now they're back home. So this is just where I'm talking about in terms of my home waters. I'm going to start with folks closest to me, my family, and then I start to talk about all my Gullah people them. So these are some maps to kind of orient us. And this gets us right to my father's birthplace, so he was born in 1950 in a small home that was built by his father and uncles. And you can see it's just on the edge of a cluster of salty waterways. And this place is called Stewart Point. And then just a few miles up the road, or up these tidal creeks, my mother was born a year later here. She was also caught by a midwife in a home that her father had built. And this place is called Page Point. And so whenever I ask my parents what they recall about these waters that surrounded them, my mother responded and she said, well, it was everywhere. To get anywhere, you had to cross some kind of bridge. And I think it's what kept us intact as a people. It's how we got here. It sustains us. And people made a living off the water. We lived off the water. And I just remember growing up, knowing that because of the water in our land, we would always have food to eat. And so this quote, which comes out of, there's a quote from Julie Dash's novel, Daughters of the Dust. Here we go. See it over there. Sorry about that. That also speaks to this sense of being not just surrounded by water, but actually in the water, right? Floating on top of it. So they say, they bring them out here. People are saying, never see a place that the land float on the water like this, and the water everywhere. So it's land, but it's floating on water. And so my mother in particular often regales my sister and me with stories of hard labor in her father's and grandfather's fields, her papa here, planting and harvesting butter beans, string beans, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, cucumbers, which would feed the family and also be sold to local grocers. And then papa here also grew sugar cane. And then for my father, his role in procuring food was mostly by way of the water. And it was expected from a very young age, fishing, shrimping, gathering oyster, catching crab. And because he and his older brother, Joe, this is my dad here, and this is his brother, because they had to go out on the boat with their father every weekend at daybreak, they also had to know how to swim. And so to ensure that one's swimming skills were up to snuff, my dad recalls his father frequently dropping one of them off the side of the boat every now and again, just to make sure they could swim. And so my both my parents, though, they talked a lot about how their fathers would wake up before the sun most days to cast their nets for a morning catch, and their mothers would prepare whatever they caught and serve it over hot grits before everyone headed off to work and school. And there's many other stories that they told, usually, you know, in repetition at different points in my childhood that helped me connect them and myself to my community and to home. So one of the stories they like to tell us is about how each of them went seeking when they were 12 years old. This is a period of deep soul searching during which one avoided worldly things, studied the Bible with special dedication, and they had all their dreams interpreted by the mother of the church. And this was all in preparation for the rite of baptism. My mother recalls seeking as a very calming time that she actually enjoyed. And that was especially because she got to do it with her little sister, Pat, who had decided she was ready at 10, and the mother of the church agreed. So they say that when the church mother and chosen deacons thought them ready, they would wade out into a nearby saltwater creek under a rising sun until warm waters would reach their waists. And my dad said they would be clad in white robes that they call sack down. And the preachers, wearing old fishing clothes beneath their own white robes, accompanied them. And then with 3 swift backward dips, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost immersed people, my mom and dad, in waters that were to birth them anew. And so during the event, my mom says that she just steeled her mind against worrying about critters trying to get up her robe. And my dad said he held his breath as tightly as he could so as not to strangle, because that was a sure sign that the devil was afoot. And so after many years of hearing different iterations of these stories, I would later read in canonical texts by scholars like Margaret Washington Creel and Patricia Jones Saxon, that these rituals of seeking and baptism, these were practices that had really maintained, sustained beliefs and practices through this violent rupture of Atlantic slavery. And then throughout my studies and experiences, I've just come to connect a lot of practices and beliefs that my parents taught us and that they carried all over the US and to 2 other continents to the practices and beliefs of my family in the Low Country. And they really provided a cultural and spiritual anchor for me throughout my pretty nomadic life. I would return every summer to run through my grandma's dusty yard, shown here, with my cousins. And I return now, and now we don't run through the yard, but we still sit under this canopy of Spanish moss. And, I return to fill my pockets with plums, definitely to practice my Gullah. So one day my cousins might stop telling me I talk like a white girl. And also just I return to reconnect with the water and to these specific waters. So many of the marine-based practices and beliefs that have helped cultivate my personal relationship to the sea, I've come to understand as revealing an ancestral relationship that traverses centuries and continents, and that also helps constitute what I understand as Gullah Geechee culture, like living culture. So today, or this evening, I really wanted to talk about some of the ways this relationship has generated several symbolic but also material functions of the sea as a medium of life. So symbolically as a site or a portal for death life, and also symbolically as blood and body, and then materially as a source of life ways. And in terms of these symbolic meanings, especially saltwater as blood and body, I want to think about the ways it helps to formulate a kind of saltwater ontology. So principles or principal concepts that help categorize people and things as types, and in this case, a saltwater type, and therefore of the ocean, but also a little something else, not just being of the ocean, right? To be a saltwater person. And this quote here from Alexis Pauline Gumbs' amazing book. I'm going to return to her at the very end, but I just love this quote from the text to kind of get at what I'm talking about, the ways it becomes a type and a way of knowing and recognizing rather. So water is life, or saltwater is life. So the sea's role as a site of life, it's multifaceted. Like I said, it's portal and passage and the life cycle, and also as sustenance for life ways. And this this quote here from the patriarch in the film Daughters of the Dust kind of speaks to this. So for many of us who live and also theorize Black diaspora, the sea, and for some the ship, it's in the sea, but the sea becomes a site of origin, a place where this thing that we call and understand and experience as Atlantic Blackness begins to take shape, carrying along many meanings and practices from several West and Central African cultures, but also being violently severed from many of those. And so in this way, the sea becomes a site of continuity of many life forms, the death of many life forms, but also the site of the birth of new ones. And so this quote from Nana Pazant kind of speaks to the sea as a place of birth, as a birthplace. And the film's multi-layered story, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, of this multi-generational Gullah family, the Pazant family, that has to decide whether or not they're going to leave the island, and they're on St. Simon's Island at Ebo's Landing, and go to the mainland or not. It really speaks to the state of liminality, of betweenness, that's engendered when one's motherland, as Nana kind of frames it here, is the water, and it's the water between a here and there, whatever that here and there may be. And so the film tells us in so many moments, in so many ways, with dialogue and imagery, that the waters that surround the island where they live, the waters are as much home as the sandy ground over black dirt, over red clay on which they stand. And then there's water's portal between the here and there. So not necessarily as home or the site of origin, but as the way there and back and forth again. And so the water would bring me, and the water going to take me back or take me home, is an often cited Gullah Geechee proverb that speaks to our journey from there to here, and it obviously invokes water as a conduit between home and this place where we are. And this other kind of excerpt from the novel. So I moved back and forth between her film and the novel. And the novel is following up on one of the descendants of the Pazant family. This particular excerpt speaks to this as well, the kind of water as passage. So whether speaking on a grand scale of our forced migration across the Atlantic and the prospect of return, or on a smaller scale about the journeys we took and still take by boat to and from locations throughout these marshlands and islands, that proverb and this quote speak of coming and going, departures and arrivals, deaths and rebirths as following the same channels. So the circularity of passage and passages is clear, and the words imbue the sea with a particularly mighty power to return and restore, and in many ways to liberate, like death itself. And we see this in the naming of our death rites as a homegoing. So this power, it may be most potently conveyed in the story that many of us have heard of some 75 Igbo captives who are said to have in 1803, when their ship, the ship that held them, reached the shores of St. Simon's Island off the coast of Georgia, when they are said to have walked out to sea en masse, electing to return home via a watery death rather than live a life in bondage and to subject their children to the same. So this is the story of Ebo landing, and it's sometimes rendered as and transformed into the story of the flying Africans, where they either emerge from the sea or instead of immersing themselves, fly off to freedom. And there's something very powerful about not juxtaposing, but analogizing flight in the skies to immersion in the ocean. That helps us also see the sea as a portal to the infinite, right? Or as infinite. And then the ways water signals a connection between life and death is also seen in baptism rites. which have been referred to as water burials by some Gullah folks in the past. And in that naming, we really can see not only the European Christian interpretations of baptism as a death of the former self and a rebirth of a new self. We also, if we attend to scholarship of Washington Creels, also LaRonda Manigault Bryant, Jason Young, and others, if we attend to some of their work, we'll also be able to see the powerful resonance of traditional African cosmologies that frequently collapse physical realms and ancestral realms, and that easily bind death and birth. So this understanding of saltwater as a site for these transits, these passages between realms, seems quite tightly tethered to an African past and present, and also to a colonial present, if you will. And we can kind of see this in these general understandings of water in different spiritual traditions, the different traditions that have helped shape Gullah spirituality. And then, you know, in addition to the sea's significance as birth, life, portal, birth, life, death, portal, there's also the ways in which healthy marine ecosystems are understood as necessary for the health of the planet and also for the sustenance of our community. And another way in which the ocean, or a specific way in which the ocean functions as a crucial life way, is fishing, subsistence fishing. This is, you know, not big industry fishing, but small scale, in order to eat and feed your family, and also to provide a livelihood for households. And so this encompasses crabbing, shrimping, and oyster harvesting as well. So Sharon Fuller, she's written and done some really nice ethnographic work with 3 fishers in the St. Helena Island area, near where my family's from. And based on her observations of their various maritime practices, cast netting, pole dipping, and dropping baskets, she's also observed their economic practices that she designates as reciprocity, sharing, and cooperation to distribute food and also basic resources. And she also talks about, which I found very familiar, she talks about this discourse of abundance that she kept hearing over and over again related to the sea, and this notion, almost a rejection or refusal of poverty and our idea of poverty because of this, you know, consistent source of life and life-giving ways from the sea. And that's a lot like my mom's assessment I shared a little while ago, no fear of hunger. And so several other scholars, a number of activists, have documented the ways in which the ocean is considered a source of life, a life way, in Gullah Geechee culture, but few have embodied Gullah stewardship of the land and water like Queen Quet, Marquetta Goodwine, beloved to me and respected chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. So and this is her picture here. And so, you know, from speaking before the United Nations in the late 90s and early 2000s, to demand global recognition of Gullah Geechee's existence as a valuable and threatened indigenous cultural community, to testifying just a couple years ago before Congress's Committee on Natural Resources on behalf of our entire planet's oceans. She's been a relentless defender of the Gullah Geechee, but in particular of our relationship to the sea that surrounds us and in many ways makes us. And so she's also been involved in the fight against offshore drilling and seismic blasting for the past 10 years, and was given the Ocean's Hero Award for that work in particular. So I wanted us to take a moment to hear her, to listen to a very powerful testimony in 2019, in which she's very clearly explicating, in my mind, a Gullah Geechee saltwater ontology that comes from the ways we, as she said, literally live in the Atlantic, and also the ways waterways function as our bloodline, in her words.
It's my pleasure to introduce my constituent, Queen Quet Marquetta Goodwine, chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. Queen Quet is the chiefess of she became the first Gullah, the hearing of the commission and environmental justice, 1st District. Please give a warm welcome.
Queen Quet, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. On the chillin'. I'm so glad for day this afternoon and things like that. And on behalf of all the Gullah Geechee Nation, my ancestors and everybody with they all my family, we want to thank Congressman Cunningham. We want to thank the chair and all of this your subcommittee and things like that. And so, as I just said to you, thank you so much for having me here today. And I said it to you in my native tongue, which is the Gullah language. So many people who have said, well, I never heard that language before, obviously have never been to this land where I'm from. We literally live in the Atlantic Ocean on islands called the Sea Islands, from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. And you will often hear native Gullah Geechee say, the water to bring we, the water going to take we back. And many of you have even sung our songs, the spirituals that are my South Carolina state music now, where we say that God going trouble the water, wade in the water. And so I'm very happy to be able to bring this flow from the Sea Islands up the hill this time so that we can sit together and talk about our love of the oceans. Because of course, for us as Gullah Geechees, the land is our family and the waterways are our bloodline. So it's of great concern and grave concern to us when we find that pollutants, poisons, overbuilding, acidification, erosion, and all of these things are now compounding as elements within the water that's changing the ecology of the water. So as someone that like for now, I'm putting the thing out the creek. So we love to eat seafood, and I'm sure all of you who come down where we are would love to eat some too. We've seen those seafoods changing. We've seen less in certain stocks. We've seen where the catfish no longer flow around St. Helena Island. So as a founding member of the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association, these are the things that made us form as a group to make sure that our voice is heard in the national discussions about what can we do to go ahead and have these tides that are rising lift all of our boats together. We make the battle boat. You might have a yacht, but trust me, if that tide is moving and we all out there, we're gonna flow with it or we're gonna fight against it. And I agree with the chairman, it shouldn't be about the fight. It should be about us being able to sit together the same way we do on our beautiful sea islands beneath those oak trees, even with a little sweet tea. I know up here, y'all don't put the sugar in until later. We put it in the beginning so that we can have some sweet discussions about this powerful element that we as human beings are all made of, water. And so when we talk about healthy oceans and healthy economies, I wanted to make sure that you also realize we have to talk about healthy communities. And so as I prepared to come here 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden the creator put the words into my mind of an acronym for the ocean, that I was to come here to ask you to be a part of opening culturally enriched avenues of navigation, so that when we talk about the ocean and the sea, we're not just talking about the fish, we're not just talking about the shrimp, but we're talking about the cultural communities that live from these fisheries, that have lived in harmony and balance with them for all these generations. A Gullah Geechee proverb says, the big fish, the nampundili fish. And so often we think that the people that are higher up in the hierarchy of government are the big fish and all the rest of us are little. But I always tell people, but a school of piranha can definitely fight back together against that big old whale. And so we know this is a whale of a number of issues, but I'm sure we can navigate this together in such a way that those whales will follow our boats the way our dolphins and porpoises do on a beautiful sea island day. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here, to engage in dialogue with you, and to be a part of something that I know is definitely a wow to have all these women here today to say, as mothers of the earth, that we are here to help nurture our oceans. So thank you, Hannah Chillin, for having me this year day right here during Black History Month. Yes, thank y'all.
So we can hear Queen Quet very beautifully and effortlessly, one flow between standard English and her St. Helena dialect of Gullah language. But we also hear her seamlessly weave information and sensibilities from indigenous knowledges and, you know, what we might consider Western science. And so we hear about this relationship with the ocean that transcends commercial interests, although certainly encompasses them as well. That includes, but also transcends recreational enjoyment, although she also talks about how we do delight in the sea and its tributaries to really turn our attention to community health, community well-being. And so her words illuminate, you know, a belonging to the sea, but also a sense of belonging that's contingent upon the sea. Like the way my mom framed it, keeping us intact in many ways. And that's not just geographically, but because of the practices and orientations. So all of these, you know, help engender what we could consider a particular indigenous environmentalism. And then to kind of switch to talk about another aspect of Gullah belonging identity, of making of Gullah things and ways. There's a common discourse of saltwater as blood, as or in blood, that you know, reflects a very essentialist ideology, an idea of a Gullah essence that locates Gullah-ness in the body by replacing or mixing this vital fluid that allows the body to live, blood with the water. And so in this quote here from a Charleston-based hip hop artist, Shalon Raquel, who's self-described Geechee girl, she's using it, you know, in beautiful hip hop metaphor, language play to talk about removing the water from one's skin, right, from underneath their skin. And we can understand the context of Charleston from which she's speaking and Gullah Geechee culture, what this means to remove the water. And so I'm thinking of this as a kind of saltwater corporeality, or the way the water is a part of the Gullah body, or what helps make a body Gullah. And this Gullah-ness can manifest or spill out, if you will, in one's actions and ways of speaking. In fact, that's how you can get a sense of whether it's in there or not. And this is something that's reflected in this very short little commentary by two other Low Country hip hop artists.
Let's see, we'll show y'all something tonight. North Carolina. You hear that Carolina? You hear it, I hear it, man. You hear that water in them, I tell you. Yeah, man.
So he said you hear that water in him, and then the other man confirms, yeah, that's salt water. And so, excuse me. So it's important, and part of why I include these types of examples in my work is it's really important to me that when I talk about my beautiful people and culture, that I'm not only talking about the Queen Quets, or, you know, folks who we recognize as traditionally Gullah, who speak the tongue in a particular way, who make sweetgrass baskets and so on. Those people are precious, and what they do is precious. But like every culture before and after it, Gullah people, we move, grow, change, we absorb and assimilate, and we reject and resist. And, you know, it's very important for me to attend to contemporary lived Gullah-ness, the ways we make meaning of what it is to be Gullah or not Gullah or Geechee. And so one of those important sites is what is understood and recognized as distinctly Gullah Geechee hip hop culture. And so I always pay very close attention to it, to what folks are doing in those spaces. And that's also from my family and some of my cousins who are
Hold it down. Ain't no speaking.
Sorry. And so saltwater as blood is the thing that helps constitute a person, constitute and sustain a person. And as we see here, water's blood can also be used to define a type of person as saltwater. So the saltwater Negro, that term is used throughout Daughters of the Dust as a way to not only demarcate, but also to disparage, quote unquote, fresh off the boat Africans, is also the way folks were described, or practices and people who are seen as primitive. And so these conceptualizations and the ways they're clearly fed by anti-Black epistemes, the same epistemes that have shaped modern race, white supremacy, they make proud self-designations and praise of another saltwaterness, like we heard among the young men, particularly powerful. Or when we name it, as a way to mark belonging, which was part of a lot of my socialization growing up. The moments where something I did was named Geechee or Saltwater were ways of, showing love and inclusion. So to celebrate this quality or this type of personhood is in many ways a refusal of the criteria that we see espoused here in these quotes by Hagar and Mr. Hale in the film that are really, Mr. Hale's not so much here, but Hagar's statement here about how those old saltwater folks do and how she doesn't want her children to be that way. And then we see kind of in contradistinction, these proud proclamations, self-proclamations, designations as saltwater. And so this proximity to ideas of Africanness, this is what it's very crucial for all of Black diaspora work, all of the work we do to situate ourselves, how we make sense of ourselves, how we treat one another. And that's what most of my work in general is concerned with. And so with Gullah'ness, this idea of a very close proximity to Africanness, different ideas of Africanness. On one hand, that's what has contributed to a few centuries of social stigmatization and systemic marginalization of Gullah Geechee ways, language and other ways, and has fueled among many folks a desire to distance oneself from Africanness, however it's imagined. So many generations, and this is pretty well documented in the literature, it was very reflected in my family, many generations of people not wanting to be defined as Gullah or associated with Gullah'ness. And then that's the one hand. On the other hand, this proximity to Africa is also what contributes to Gullah Geechee distinctiveness and these ideas about our authenticity and our purity, which have become a source of great pride, or for some people always were a source of great pride. And we also are seeing the ways it becomes a source of revenue in a growing tourism industry, and particularly heritage tourism. So these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about in this developing project, our different survival strategies among contemporary Gullah Geechee people and how we have to navigate and sometimes exploit different aspects of anti-Blackness in that work. But my point is, I care most deeply about living, breathing Gullah Geechee people, and through them protecting, fighting for them and caring for them, we protect the culture and maintain the culture and so forth. And so all of these, I'm about to wrap up. I know I'm going over. So through these conceptions of saltwater, as or in blood, and the ways they allow us to understand someone as being of the water, it's important to note the complicated kind of essentializing work that's happening here. So it is built out from an idea of blood relations and bloodlines and Gullah Geechee-ness is, in your body. But again, the ways that it's detected, the ways it actually has meaning or is experienced is through embodied practice, embodied cultural practice, how one lives, so how they talk, move, eat, worship. That's where Gullah'ness is most saliently located. and embodied practice. So in this way, this can kind of help us circle back to indigenous materialisms, environmentalisms. Sorry. Right. There we go. Sorry about that. And in particular, this understanding of a continuity between our bodies and land, sky, water, and also other beings. This derives from the many African and Native American cosmologies that shape Gullah culture. So those indigenous systems for understanding the universe, how it's created, structured, how it works. And so I kind of wanted to connect all that by closing with this quote from Alexis Pauline's recent work, Undrowned Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals, because she's really speaking to the sense of continuity, a continuity between her own being, the ocean, and then to fellow sea mammals. So she says this is a connection that's forged through her ancestral passage through, and also the death and rebirth in the sea, right, via the Middle Passage. She's talking about recognition and also identification between sea mammals who she's understanding herself as being one of, right, of this kind of saltwater ontology, who she says either know or are learning. And she calls the book an apprenticeship, learning ways of breathing, which returns us to our opening exercise of breathing and grounding. And she talks about learning ways of breathing in order to live in and of the sea. And so that ways, in those ways, I think really help us get to this saltwater ontology that certainly draws from indigenous cosmologies, but also from this singular experience of Atlantic slavery and the continuities, deaths, and births that it brought and continues to bring about.
Thank you, Dr. Smalls. And I guess I'll pass the mic to Dr. Abegunde.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, so much, Dr. Smalls. So there is, of course, I think like everyone else, a lot going through my head at this particular point, and a lot to think about as I am hearing you speak about this for the first time. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to talk a little bit about things that resonated with me, because I have lots of questions for you about such. But I want to talk about a few things that really stuck out with me and things that resonate with me in terms of cycles and embodiment, in fact. And it made me think of it the first time that I met Queen Quet was in 1999 in Charleston. And this idea that she talks about ocean opening culturally enriched avenues of navigation, and how what I'm hearing in your work is the way that water is stored in us, like we are holders of water. The water is outside us, the water is within us, and in many ways that in order to come to a better understanding of not only the environment, but ourselves and our interconnections as human beings, right? That we must first acknowledge this. We must acknowledge this in a very profound way, that we in fact cannot escape water in any type of manner. The other thing is I was struck by how you began by talking about moving away from home, coming to the Midwest, right? And the ways in which that how sometimes moving away from home can bring us closer to home, right? And thinking about how that in terms of the African experience as part of enslavement, and particularly in the Carolinas, and the moving, how the movement, the stripping away of home as a wound and a trauma, in fact, forces the recreation of home, right? But also the need for us to think about how Africans, and particularly in Gullah Geechee community, there is the breath and there is the water, but there is a resistance. There's an understanding that resistance is necessary, but the resistance has been both an ability to push away and to exclude what is not needed, but to take in, right? In the same way that water has a way, water is like different than earth, right? Earth takes in and holds and hides, but water gives back. Water is the womb, it's the dreaming, it's the place, and water refuses you actually any space that you would forget. And so the fact that for me that Gullah Geechee people are on the water, are the water, that the salt water resides in them is a really very clear indication, almost as if an ancestral, right, an ancestral claiming that they will remember, right? They will remember forever, right? Because you cannot get salt water out of you, right? I was glad when you came to, the saltwater Negroes, because I was thinking of Daughters of the Dust and also Stephanie Smallwood, right? How in so many ways that term is used to denigrate people, right? The old ways, how you hold the old ways, but the culture says, and Queen says, that to hold on to the old ways is absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary act to do what we're talking about in terms of paying attention to and attending to the breathing contemporary lived Gullah-ness, right? Because the other thing that we know about water is that in order for any of us to live, that the water must flow, right? Stagnation brings death, right? And in, I think, cultures that are indigenous cultures that really rely and integrate ancestral practices, but as simultaneously, which is the gift, I think, of being African and being descendants of Africans, to be able to take all of this and simultaneously recreate something to live. This is a gift to know to know that in order to live and to also provide life, that we must do these things. I was thinking about the language you cry in. That documentary has always stayed how that the power. And so I'm thinking about power and language here. And although we're thinking about language in terms of what was spoken and dialects, right? The water itself is the language, right? How it flows, right? How it sounds going down your throat. If you were quiet enough, right? How it sounds flowing through your veins, recognizing water and blood are simultaneous, are substances that can't be separated really for you if you are going to live. So those were the things that were immediately going through my head that I can speak to. I want to come back to this 5-year meditation that you talked about, and perhaps somebody will have a question about this to address that. But when you said that, I immediately thought, well, here is the perfect number 5 for Daughters of Oshun, right? Here is the perfect number for the time. Like, what is the process of time that is needed for human beings to see change? What is the amount of time that it takes for water to reveal anything in itself? What is the amount of time that it takes for the ancestors? So thinking about rituals in Gullah Geechee communities and other communities, right? That this is a cycle of birth and rebirth of ritual, right? And that one does not, one conducts ritual and you wait for something to arise out of it. And so then you wait for something to arise out of it, and then you put it aside. And so when thinking about your meditations and coming to this work, what that must have been and meant for you to sit in a space with the ancestors, with the sweet water, right? And thinking about the ocean, because we know sweet water runs into the ocean, right? And so thinking about Oshun and Yemonja and where those things intersect, where the bodies of water intersect, particularly in certain countries, right? Also inviting us to think about where that intersection is a portal, right? That is a portal. And what happens when not only is the water a portal, but our bodies are a portal. And what happens when we step into that intersection, right? And from, you know, my time in Charleston and listening and taking care of this, that what you are doing here, right, is really asking us, and you said that, you know, this is more personal and perhaps not scholarship. I'm always challenging that as somebody who is a creative academy, because what you are doing here is you are calling into that portal, and that being is, you know, you're calling into that being the people you love, and the people who are the caretakers of their land, right? The people who are the medicine people, right? Because even for the herbalists, having, you know, met old root doctors in the community, right? That the water sustains this, the water finds its way to the roots. And so you're really asking, right, that we understand that breath and water are the things that are going to continue to give birth. The question is, what does that look like in that portal? Is there another portal? Is there something on the other side of it, right? Is there a way that as community, right? Water in terms of ecology, all the different kinds of ecologies that live inside there, and then deep, the things that we can't even see, right? You are asking the larger world community, I think, right, to pay attention and to listen to a community that has a voice, the community that has a language, a community that has actually never lost its ability to communicate, right, with an element that can take so many multiple forms, right? So many multiple forms that just the element itself, if we stop to think about it, gives us an indication of the possibility of the potential for humanity, right? Gives us that possibility. And so I'm going to stop there, because those are the things that I had in my head, as listening to you know, share this and share about your family. And thank you. I'm really gratitude for doing that, and even the examples of how your own family has taken that out of their community, but as you said, gone to 2 continents, right? The things that connect, and how we are, the further we get away from home, the closer we are to home, right? We seek it, right? It seeks us. So I'll stop there. I hope that made some sense. My head is so full, and it's just really full of gratitude for your work. So thank you so very much for the invitation to think on this.
Yes, I want to thank you both very much, Dr. Smalls, Dr. Abegunde, for giving us a lot to think about. And if we could have just one round of applause before I stop our recording. I'm going to open up the floor for some questions, and then I will invite us all to kind of take a break, grab something to drink, and come back, and perhaps in a more relaxed environment, just engage in a conversation with Dr. Smalls and Dr. Abegunde and everyone else who wants to stick around. So thank you very much again.